Welcome to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. I'm Beth Hessel, the Executive Director, and you see also Tess Galen, our events coordinator, who helps ensure that you get onto our programs and that they are fabulous programs. So welcome. We're so glad you are here. If you are from the Philadelphia area, you probably know the Athenaeum and know what an amazing space that we are, and what a wonderful community of people who are intellectually curious and love to learn about the arts and literature, culture, our built environment, and all things Philly. If this is your first time visiting us online, I hope you will continue to enjoy our virtual programs. If you can come and visit us in person, we hope you will. We have an open membership, so you are invited to consider joining our community in whatever way you are able to. We look forward to having you a part of our vibrant and intellectually curious group of members. Today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Laura Wolf Powers, who will be our speaker. She's going to give her talk, and then we will moderate a Q&A time at the end of her talk, so please stay for that. Laura is an associate professor of urban planning and policy and planning at Hunter College, where she teaches economic development, community planning, and real estate development. Some of her current research projects, now that this book is out, include a critical examination of real property taxation and land value capture practices in the United States, and community engaged research on Black-owned businesses and in East and Central Brooklyn, which has been funded by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. She serves on the editorial boards of Metropolitics and of the Journal of the American Planning Association, and as an academic advisor to the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, the Pratt Center for Community Development, and the Western Queens Community Land Trust. So she is bringing not only an academic knowledge, but also real research and experience in the lives of people who live in urban areas to her work. I invite you to join me now in a warm virtual welcome to Laura Wolf Powers to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia.
Thank you, Beth, for that introduction. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I am delighted to be here. Okay, is this good? Can people see it? Yeah, okay, terrific. Yeah, I'm delighted to be here. As Beth said, I'm a professor at Hunter. I taught at University of Pennsylvania from 2008 to 2014, and that's when the idea for this book started to germinate. And I just thought that I would give a little bit of background, kind of the origin story about how I came to write the book. So this is a map that's in the front of the book itself, and it's kind of the territory that the book covers. You can see that it's these neighborhoods on the very extreme west side of West Philadelphia. I'm sorry, east side of West Philadelphia. It's starting at Market Street and going up to the Schuylkill River and the rail yards on the north, kind of boundaried by the river and 30th Street Station on the east, and then by about 40th Street on the west. And so this area became interesting to me when I was teaching a community development course at Penn, and I wanted to do some kind of field experience for the students. And I became really fascinated with this commercial corridor here, Lancaster Avenue. So for people who are familiar with Philadelphia, Lancaster Avenue was it became a commercial corridor at the time that the streetcar was extended across the Schuylkill River from Center City. Before that, this was the mid-19th century. Before that, this area had been farms and estates. It began to be populated with houses and with factories in the mid-19th century. And this kind of diagonal road, Lancaster Avenue, it actually predated the entire street grid. It had been first a Native American path, and then it was a turnpike that went all the way, in fact, to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So it was really here before a lot of the other built environment was here. But Lancaster Avenue, to me, represented an interesting phenomenon for community development students, in that there was just a lot going on in around it and in the neighborhoods around it. So I asked the students first in the course to walk from 34th Street to 40th Street along Lancaster Avenue and sort of record their impressions. And then later on in the class, they did a retail market analysis. So this was kind of a struggling commercial corridor at that point, a housing market analysis, and proposed public space intervention. Because this is an area, and this was part of why it was fascinating to me, that it was changing very rapidly at this point. I mean, I'm talking about 2010, 2011. So Schuylkill Yards, the proposal for Schuylkill Yards would not be unveiled for a few more years, but it was obvious that the universities, and particularly Drexel University, had plans for this part of University City, and that was kind of evident, or becoming evident. However, at the same time that there was a lot of enthusiasm and these innovation district plans were beginning to be formulated, there was also a lot of kind of a persistent poverty and economic precarity in the neighborhoods immediately to the north of Lancaster Avenue. So I'm talking about primarily Mantua and Belmont, Halton Village being sort of an exception to that. But there was a lot of vacant land, a lot of houses that were either vacant or in disrepair, and developers had started to acquire vacant lots or vacant homes and tear them down and develop housing oriented toward students, like what you see here. So it was an area with a lot of changing dynamics. And at the same time, oh yes, and also in 2013, the Philadelphia School District made a decision to close a number of public schools, and one of these was University City High School. So you see here, it was slowly over the following year, 2014, 2015, demolished, leaving quite a big open area right behind the University City Center, Science Center on Market Street that would become a new development. Also, there were a lot of like overlapping zones and districts in this neighborhood, which I found interesting. In 2014, President Obama had declared a large part of University City north of Market Street as a promise zone, which was a kind of federal designation that qualified the neighborhood for kind of special consideration for funding. But you also had the University City District, which is a kind of a bid structure that's paid for by the universities and finances kind of extra policing and extra sanitation and things like that. So that was here, although you'll note that it stops at Spring Garden, which is significant. And then also there were Keystone Opportunity Zones, which is a state of Pennsylvania kind of economic development initiative that provides tax relief to firms that locate within the zones. And then there was starting in 2017, after the Trump era tax cuts were passed, there was also a federal opportunity zone. So you had these zones in these districts and just a lot going on. So I started to interview people who lived or worked in this area, and people from the various institutions and community-based organizations and civic associations about kind of what their expectations were for the new development that had been recently announced. And I quickly came to see that that history was playing a big role here, that people remembered back to earlier phases of redevelopment, earlier ways of redevelopment 50 years before, and that was really an important part of the story. So I ended up going and doing some archival research in Temple Urban Archives. And so I ended up writing 2 historical chapters and 2 chapters that are kind of set in the 2010s. And that's the structure of the book. But I'm mostly going to be talking today about the 2010s, but I did want to kind of emphasize that a big part of the backdrop for today's redevelopment is something that occurred in the late 1960s and the 1970s, which is that urban renewal officials working very closely with representatives of area universities, and Penn was particularly powerful in this. They cleared this area that you see here between 36th and 38th, and actually some surrounding areas as well. But this was the kind of epicenter of it. It was known as to urban renewal officials as University City Urban Renewal Area Unit 3. To its residents, it was known as Greenville or the Black Bottom, and there were actually 69 businesses, 1,407 homes, and 3,400 people who were removed from this area over the course of the mid to late 60s. And what replaced, and this was an African-American neighborhood, and it was considered to be blighted, a slum neighborhood, but of course it was people's home, and also there were about 254 households that owned their own homes here who lost them in the course of this redevelopment project. So what replaced them was the University City Science Center along Market Street, and then a high school, University City High School, and I've already shown you a picture of that in the process of being torn down in 2014, 2015. So this is kind of the backdrop to a lot of the way people thought about the next wave of redevelopment, and it was it was kind of in the background as an important history to what happened in the 2010s. So this is around the time around 2010, 2011, 2012, and I was teaching this class and working with my students in this area. That was kind of a pivot point in the sense that Drexel University was making plans. This is some material from the 2012 master plan, and this was they marked out this area, which actually had been the site where University City High School had stood and it still was there actually in 2012 when this master plan came out. As a kind of in the master plan, they were talking about an area for innovation and scientific development, and then also a few years later, Schuylkill Yards was announced, and that was also a partnership with a private developer to build kind of mixed use live, work, play development on university land using a ground lease structure. And the idea, as you can see, was to sort of build these mixed use areas, attract businesses, attract workers, attract new residents, and thereby revitalize this underutilized area. So these are the two projects, Schuylkill Yards, which actually that elliptical park that's shown just there in the rendering is actually a thing now. You can go there, and that's the Bolton building behind it. And then also on the site of the University City High School and its environs, there was another innovation hub that was done in conjunction with Wexford Science and Technology. So you can see that taking shape now as well in 2023. So while all this was going on, and then this is what University City High School looked like prior to its demolition, and then as I mentioned, it was torn down after the school district decided to close it and sell the land to Drexel. So at the same time as all this planning was going on for the innovation districts, there were other planning processes that were happening in the Lower Lancaster corridor, and you see two of those here. I was particularly interested in the Mantua Transformation Plan because it kind of lays out the intention of residents in Mantua, which again is a kind of economically struggling area with high poverty. So it really lays out the intention of these residents to maintain the neighborhood's identity in the midst of oncoming change. So this plan actually spawned a group called the Mantua Civic Association, which is a group of leaders that are pursuing development in Mantua that they see as compatible with the community's character, namely renter and owner occupied units that are affordable affordable to people with stable but relatively low incomes. And I ended up attending meetings of this group over the course of about 18 months in 2015 and 2016. So here are some statistics that and photographs that illustrate what was happening to Mantua during this period. And what it reflects is the increasing development of housing marketed to students and the increasing expectation of property price appreciation as these live, work, play, innovation environments were taking place about 10 blocks to the south. Powelton's story is a little bit different because the residents of that neighborhood are more affluent. But Powelton residents also struggle with owner-owned housing in their neighborhood. And as we'll see shortly, the alliance between the Powelton Village Civic Association and the Mantua Civic Association ended up leading to a key community benefits agreement in 2017. But the bottom line here is that the residents of the neighborhoods near the Innovation District development understood what was at stake as the area was changing, and they were determined to exert some kind of influence. This picture is actually of an event that took place in 2014. It was a project, kind of heritage project. It was called Funeral for a Home, and if you see that home in the background with the sort of garland of flowers over it, that's 3711 Mellon Street, which is a home that lot had been purchased, and the house, it was worth more without the house than the house, and it was a vacant house, and so it was about to be torn down. But the people who staged this event really wanted to emphasize that it had meaning as a place where people had lived and raised kids, and that something was being lost. And so they actually had a funeral ceremony with a preacher and a choir, and this was a lot of the people who I spoke to who live in this neighborhood found this to be a really important and meaningful thing that they had done. There was actually a community meal that was done in conjunction with that. That is the cover photo for the book. So here's kind of what happened. There was a 2014 input session that was about the future of the University City High School site, right? And people knew that it was kind of coming into play, and they really wanted to shape what would happen there. But relatively soon after relatively soon after the closure was announced, the school district announced that it had agreed to sell the site to Drexel. And in order to create the Innovation District development, the U City Square development, they needed zoning changes, right? So there was a local council person, Janie Blackwell, who said, well, the zoning, I'm not going to approve the zoning unless you have a community benefits agreement with the residents. And so there was a negotiation process, and Mantua and Powelton organizations both participated in the negotiation process, but it was very hurried negotiation because the sale, there was pressure on the sale to occur, and the people who lived in Mantua, the less affluent neighborhood, felt that there had been a lot of conversation about sort of the design, the built environment, the parking, the scale of the new development, but there hadn't been conversations about some of their priorities like affordability and equity. So that's captured in this quote from a member of the Civic Association, the Mantua Civic Association, who said all they wanted to talk about was parking and trees. And so then when the Schuylkill Yards was announced a couple of years later, activists had learned from this, had learned from the previous experience of community benefits negotiation, and they were very active going into the Schuylkill Yards process. So this was the Schuylkill Yards Innovation District was the partnership between Drexel and a hometown developer, Brandywine Realty, to develop this 10 acres near the university on the east side of its campus near the 30th Street train station. So they announced the project. John Fry from Drexel and Jerry Sweeney of Brandywine introduced the project in March of 2016, and they unveiled this sort of before and after rendering. And one of the things that they that was part of this announcement was that it was going to be an equitable development, that there were going to be opportunities, economic opportunities for people from all over West Philadelphia, and that that there would not be any displacement. Again, Councilwoman Blackwell said, well, there needs to be a community benefits agreement in place before I'm going to approve the necessary zoning. And what happened was the Mantua and Powelton Alliance, which was a combination of the Mantua and Powelton Village Civic Associations, as well as another community-based organization, negotiated directly with Brandywine Realty Trust. The city was not part of it. Drexel was not part of it. It was these groups with Brandywine. And, it was an interesting set of conversations, just in that, essentially this developer, Brandywine, was being asked to address a number of concerns that arguably were outside the ambit of its mission, right? This is a company, they're traded, they're responsible primarily to their investors, their shareholders, and yet they were being asked to consider affordable housing and to consider a bunch of asks that the community organizations had, and the community organizations were pretty adamant that they wanted to achieve not only some participation in the design, but this time, unlike in the previous community benefits negotiation, at this point, they were very interested in having support from somewhere, whether it was from the city or from the developer, for investment in the kind of housing that would enable people from the neighborhood to remain and keep a foothold in this neighborhood that was changing very fast, where property prices were rising very quickly. So this group asked Brandywine initially for $72 million, and this was from the perspective of many people who were observing, this was kind of an inappropriate thing to ask Brandywine. But then on the other hand, if some people thought that it was inappropriate for community groups to be making asks of Brandywine, other commentators thought the entire community benefit process was a poor substitute for what should have been a deeper critique of the development. So there were a lot of layers of subsidy going into this project, and the narrative around it was that subsidized property investment is universally and self-evidently desirable, good for the city, good for the region. Some people felt that this narrative conflated real estate investment and broad-based economic development, and it was failing to account for the collateral impact that the project would have on low socioeconomic status households, absent an effort to hold down housing prices in their neighborhoods. So ultimately a community benefits agreement was signed. Drexel or Brandywine committed to some open space, to ongoing consultation about mitigation and traffic and parking and such, and it did agree to contribute $620,000 annually to a community fund run by the Mantua Civic Association, the Powelton Village Civic Association, the council member's office, and so on. And so this was kind of how this negotiation ended up. So I just want to talk a little bit about kind of ways in which this situation is similar to and different from the events of 1969, when the urban renewal displaced people directly. So, you know, whether through primary or secondary displacement, and in this case, it's the displacement is secondary, university-led redevelopment is affecting adjacent neighborhoods. And innovation is conceptualized here as kind of a fix for urban distress, for urban underdevelopment. The idea that the university research can combine with commercial enterprises to create jobs, to create new spaces. This is a kind of an answer to the economic development challenge that the city has. It's very similar. You can see a lot of similarities with the discourse from 50 years ago about the role of the University City Science Center in the economy of the city of Philadelphia and the region. But you know, one of the points that I make in the book is that as part of elevating the innovation district as a new neighborhood, which is going to attract new workers, knowledge workers, and new residents, they're kind of devaluing spaces that are nearby. And if University City Square or U City Square is a community of ingenuity, you know, what was there? Are these other areas, you know, not innovative? Did they not, you know, have economic and social value? So, and also another continuity with the past is that civic groups have really mobilized to advocate for the existence of the incumbent residents. And while this happened in 1969 or in the 1960s with a group called the Citizens Committee for Urban Renewal Area Unit 3, they fought very hard, and unfortunately they were unsuccessful. So they were trying to preserve some of the housing or to preserve some of the land in Unit 3 for either rehabilitated housing or new housing, and they did not succeed. But in this instance, you had civic mobilization, and groups were, you know, the displacement was, the threat of displacement was secondary rather than primary, but you still had people organizing and kind of speaking up for themselves. So here are some of the differences, and as I already mentioned, there's not just direct displacement this time around. The Philadelphia economy is on an upswing. People are calling the University City area Silicon Valley. You have a lot of bioscience companies locating, and there's a lot going on. At the time of the original urban renewal development, the city was really hemorrhaging population and jobs. So that's another difference. The role of the city government is really much smaller, and it's a general matter. The government's role in urban policy has shrunk, and particularly the federal role in subsidizing urban redevelopment. So different kind of formations are coming into the center of the conversation. And one of these things is this idea of the public-private partnership. And this Innovation District P3, as it's called, is a kind of standard product in redevelopment, you know, in this sort of world of urban real estate development at this point. So, you know, where the developer will partner with the university and ground lease some land and and then do not just labs and offices, but in fact apartment buildings and retail and hotels and so on. So and another thing that was the case in the 2010s is that the university and the city were both absent from the community benefits negotiation. They kind of left that task to the developer, which is a big sort of difference in urban politics from 50 years ago. And another difference is that universities are making significant investments in education and workforce development. And Drexel's Dornsife Center in Mantua is an example of this. So this is an era whereas the universities, the West Philadelphia Corporation in the 1960s pretty much ignored community-based attempts to participate in the redevelopment or to advocate for their own interest in the redevelopment. You really have much more inclusion, much more outreach. There are a number of career ladder, career pipeline programs. So you have kind of the on the one hand some dynamics in the property market that are really threatening the longevity of this neighborhood, or the people's ability to stay there. But on the other hand, you have a lot of recognition on the part of universities that they need to be partners with the people in the surrounding neighborhoods. This is a map from the Mantua Transformation Plan of all the vacant land in Mantua, and this was back in 2010. There's a lot less vacant land now, and much of it is in the process of being redeveloped. But I guess I just want to sort of say that this was viewed by the Mantua Civic Association as an important resource, the vacant land, particularly the publicly owned vacant land, because it was seen as land that could be transferred to not-for-profit developers who might develop deeply affordable housing there, perhaps to a community land trust. Recently there was a piece of legislation introduced in the Philadelphia City Council that would have given priority to community-based organizations for land that was in the Philadelphia Land Bank, which is a kind of consolidated place for publicly owned vacant land or publicly owned land that has been taken for non-payment of taxes, and so rather than going directly to the sheriff's sale, or rather than having the city make a deal with the developer, the idea with this legislation is that there would be an option for community-based groups to use the public land for whether it was urban farming and gardening or affordable housing development. The conflict, however, is that Philadelphia is it's an agonizing process every year to balance the city's budget, and some people are going to see the land bank as an entity that's really primarily meant to maximize revenue for the city by selling land at to the highest bidder, and thereby putting resources into the city fisc. So my recommendations for I have recommendations in the book for both the city and the universities. I think it's really important to stabilize homeowners who are vulnerable as well as tenants, because there are a lot of really positive things, from jobs to educational opportunities. There's a new school in U City Square, and it's important that people who have historically been kind of left out of economic redevelopment have the chance to participate. And in order to do that, there are a number of there needs to be a concerted effort to keep land affordable and keep the price appreciation from driving people out of the neighborhoods. So there's recommendations for both the city and universities. And I just wanted to, as I close, make a point of talking a little bit about a situation which is not in the Lower Lancaster corridor, but which is on 40th and Market Street, which is an area that a property that was owned by a privately owned, where people are using Section 8 vouchers to pay their rent. This was recently, these people have recently left this area and had to find housing elsewhere because the developer or the owner decided that they wanted to sell it. So this is an example of a situation where a piece of land, because of all of the high tech and bioscience and innovation development happening nearby, has become a lot more valuable. And you see the displacement effect that it has on people. So there's been people who are from the area may have heard about this this campaign to help people who are subject to displacement because of this. So I think that's my last. Oh yeah, I think well. This let me just say just a couple more things. I have some more broad recommendations. And one of them is that, we think about investment, not just in dollar terms, but in terms of people's emotional investment, their investment of their time, their kind of the historical ties that they have to places, and understanding that, you don't have to be a knowledge worker to have, to be innovative and have ideas worth pursuing. So, focused on this. This is a photograph here of some of the new housing that's in uCity Square, and it's very much focused on sort of attracting new residents to the area, but there is a lot of culture and history and heritage and people's lives already in the neighborhood. So, and I also talk about wanting to understand a little bit about how past inequities and inequalities have led to the current distribution of wealth and opportunity, which I think is important to keep in mind in the context of redevelopment. So that is my presentation, and I will stop sharing so that I can take some questions. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm muted. I'm talking just to myself here. If you have any questions, please, put them in the chat or the Q&A section. And I think, so there was one, Stephen is wondering what it means to stabilize a homeowner.
What does it mean to stabilize a homeowner? I think it can mean helping. I mean, in the city of Philadelphia does have a number of programs to do this, to help them put their get their financial houses in order, to pay the property taxes, to pay utility bills, to avoid foreclosure, essentially, and also to do repairs. And I am certainly aware that this is an effort that both the city of Philadelphia and to some extent Drexel have been making with homeowners throughout West Philadelphia.
So Charles Haas has an interesting question. How do you balance the conflicting objectives if there's not totality of convergence between what might be in the best interest of an individual neighborhood versus the best interest of the city?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I think what Professor Haas is referring to is that this is the development of these areas in University City is a great opportunity for the city of Philadelphia as a whole to gain new residents, to gain jobs, to gain tax revenue. And so it is very complicated to try and figure out how to sort of balance that with the very real needs of people in a distressed neighborhood. And I think that the key really is I think it's possible to have profitable and prosperous innovation development while still holding land prices down in neighborhoods that are adjacent, so that people who live in those neighborhoods are able to be proximate to the new retail, to the new open space, to the schools, to the benefits of that development, and they won't have to, and if that's the case, then I think there can be a more, there is a way of balancing it, but I think you really have to look to how land is being treated, and I would argue that it shouldn't be treated as a commodity in quite the way that current convention has it doing.
There was a little conversation at the beginning, Jim Gardner and Joshua Castano, about the difference between special services districts and business improvement districts. And would you be willing to say a little bit about the differences between them, particularly as it might relate to development for the rest of the audience.
Yeah, so University City, the person who wrote this in the chat is absolutely right. It's a special services district. I forgot that term when I was describing it. And it has essentially private parties, pay into a fund that is then used to essentially kind of enhance public services in an area. So a little bit of extra security, extra, some public realm maintenance, some kind of clean and safe type of interventions. So I think that a business improvement district sort of has some of the same characteristics, but the special services district has not-for-profit organizations, in this case, the Eds and Meds, contributing to the pool of funding that is used.
How does this project that you explore here in University City, are there any commonalities that you're seeing in some of the other areas in Brooklyn and New York City that you've been researching?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think throughout New York City, there's been a lot. I mean, it's very common, or it's a very popular economic development strategy to do kind of tech-based development, or development that attempts to kind of capitalize on the resource that is universities and hospitals to create spaces, these kind of hubs where that research gets commercialized, where it becomes, where it turns into products, and then becomes the basis for profitable companies. And in New York City, there has been a lot of tech-oriented development in areas that had been manufacturing zones, like the Brooklyn Navy Yard is an example of that. There's partnerships with universities that are connected to that. You've seen Columbia University recently create a new campus in Morningside Heights, which is based on tech development. So it's a strategy that people are increasingly using, and I think I would say that it's a good strategy. It's one that it is a little dangerous because when it involves partnerships with real estate developers, it's going to have these collateral effects on property markets, and it's going to sort of reinforce patterns of economic and social inequality. And so I think there's opportunities, but there's dangers. And in the book, I talk about some of the ways to try and face some of the dangers and mitigate them.
So I think, as Stephen was wondering, if people in Mantua cannot benefit from the more vibrant economy, stronger city tax base, increased employment, business, and retail opportunities, and what you are saying is that they may be priced out of their homes or their living situation in that area, so they would not then be able to benefit.
Yeah, that's yes. I mean, a very good example of this has to do with the school that the Powell Slams school that is being built on the U City Square site. The catchment area for that school is the neighborhood around it, and so the opportunity to have a really high quality K-8 education is going to be available to people who live in the area. And so if the area is more economically mixed, economically integrated, more people can think of the innovation oriented development as an engine for social mobility, as opposed to something that's going to just consolidate or increase the wealth of people who already are quite privileged.
So Elaine is asking, why do you think that the University City Science Center, coming out of the 1960s and 70s redevelopment, never realized its promises to the city to become a tech hub, and what might be different about the current redevelopment that promises to do so?
I think cities were a very different animal in the late 1960s and 70s. I mean, Philadelphia had been such a manufacturing giant, and a lot of that was either being relocated to the suburbs or to the south at that point, and eventually overseas. And so the city was struggling, and I think it looked to sort of these knowledge industries and to its universities as a way of creating a new kind of economy. And I think that part of what happened with that was that there wasn't infrastructure yet for that. I think there's since then kind of university research, university research has become a lot more kind of oriented toward commercialization and toward opportunities for to build markets for products that are developed in labs. And I think that you're seeing the fruits of that in some of the bioscience development that's happening in University City today. At the time, I don't think that was quite as the sort of infrastructure for tech transfer and commercialization was quite as present. But I think it is, it sort of remains to be seen. But I think that there's, very hopeful signs in Philadelphia. And, I talk about that in the conclusion of my book and sort of say, like, well, there's some question about whether people are going to be coming to offices at all anymore in the post-COVID era, because it's become so easy to work from home. But as I say, it's a little bit hard to do bench science or mentor a student or do an experiment from a home office. And so that actually bodes well for University City in terms of being a place where bioscience establishments are clustered.
Nice. And so Sherman comments that the preservation of the character of a neighborhood, its historic resources, the scale of each block, the pattern of life, these are often overlooked for the benefit of large development. Preservation can help any neighborhood keep a sense of itself as the city changes while taking advantage of wider improvements. We want to reflect on that.
I see. No, I mean, I also saw that somebody from Temple is on here who is involved in the Funeral for a Home project that I highlighted in the presentation. And I think that's really at the heart of that the places have meaning for people, places have value. They're not necessarily equatable with the property value or the value that can be denominated in dollars. And I think that there is a response. I mean, my own view, and clearly the commenters' view, is that there is a responsibility on the part of government and civil society both to try and valorize that. And so I think preservation is an important value, and I think Philadelphia has a lot of very ardent preservationists who in its community, and I think that's a great thing. And I think it's important to also recognize that even a neighborhood that doesn't have sort of architectural historic significance is still a significant place, and a place where people are invested, not with money, but in other ways.
Well, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions, but this has been a wonderful conversation here. A lot of questions that it came online that you were able to speak to. Oops, I just see one more. Good, Marissa, you got under the wire here. Is there a role for reparations when we look at the first and second order effects of the displacement from Drexel and Penn?
Well, I mean, I teach in an urban planning program, and I sort of circulate in among people who are academics who teach planning and who think about both current planning practice and planning history. The reparations has been increasingly prominent in discussions. I think that we tend to be to sort of view the urban renewal era as a time when mistakes were made, but things are different now. We're not doing that anymore. We're not demolishing entire neighborhoods, and that's quite true. But I think some of the habits of mind are still present. Sort of the idea that that neighborhoods are distressed because because the people living in them are in some way flawed, or that, and I think remembering the history and remembering that in fact, the reason that Greenville or the Black Bottom was considered blighted had to do with a real estate color line that kept many African Americans from living any place except sort of overcrowded housing where they were paying above market rents, and that those kinds of dynamics, which were very much not part of the market, had a big impact on people's life chances then, and then that has effects going into future generations. So I do think that a reparations approach would be an appropriate thing for universities to look into, and I think that for example, that universities could also be involved in the effort to buy property that is about to become extremely valuable and preserve it in terms of being affordable for people who can't pay really high rents.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us today, Laura Wolfe Powers. I hope that you all have learned some things, had some food for thought, and we're getting more things start popping in now with notes for people. And if you enjoy our noontime programs, our next one will be Friday, February 10th at noon. We will have Martha Cutter, who's professor of the English department at University of Connecticut, with her talking about her new book, The Many Resurrections of Henry Box Brown. In the meantime, tomorrow evening, we have our first Classical Guitar Society soiree at 6 p.m. with the Philadelphia Classical Guitar Society. There are probably a few tickets left for that. And on Thursday at 3, you can come here in person also for a lecture by Dr. Lily Cass with Opera Philadelphia, preparing for Carmina Burana, which is sold out. But if you have tickets, you'll be able to see it. If not, you can come and learn from Dr. Cass also a bit about that opera. If you're interested in all of our programs, please go to our events website and you will see all that we have going on. But as always, I think you can expect high quality conversations with scholars like Dr. Wolfe Powers here at the Athenaeum. Thank you again, and hope to see all of you soon.